What know which will tell you about Sagittarius shadow and sacred power. Have you ever wondered why some of the brightest, most optimistic souls carry a kind of silence that feels older than their years? Why the ones who make everyone else laugh, who carry the torch of hope in every room, sometimes go home and face a darkness no one ever sees? There is a secret the stars rarely speak of. A truth hidden behind Sagittarius laughter. Their freedom. Their big dreams and bigger promises. Tonight we step into that secret. Tonight we uncover the shadow of Sagittarius and the sacred power no which wants you to fully understand. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine not the calm earth, but a living flame. A fire that searches, reaches, stretches toward the sky. That is Sagittarius, the keeper of spiritual horizons, the guardian of untamed truth. People see the joke, the adventure, the confidence. They don't see the weight of meaning this sign carries, the fear that if they stop moving, everything inside will catch up to them. What if I told you that Sagittarius' hunger for expansion is not escapism, but a forgotten form of worship? That their questions are not rebellion but prayer? Tonight we will walk into their shadow, not to expose them but to reveal you, the part of you that seeks, that doubts, that carries old fires in a modern life. And if, as you listen, something ancient in you stirs, stay. This message found you for a reason. Gate 1: The Sacred Restlessness. Sagittarius and the Shadow of Endless Seeking. Sagittarius is the eternal traveler, the archer whose arrows are made of light. They are born with an instinct to move, to question, to cross boundaries, spiritual, emotional, or physical, because something inside them whispers constantly, there must be more. To many, this looks like adventure, optimism, even freedom. But beneath that glowing fire lies the shadow few ever see. The fear that if they stop moving, they'll have to face the emptiness they've been running from. This is the silent burden of Sagittarius, the ache between meaning and escape. From the outside, Sagittarius looks like the embodiment of faith. They laugh easily, love fully, and talk about the universe like an old friend. But deep within there's a hunger that never seems to end. They search for truth in every philosophy, every book, every new experience, but often return with the same unspoken question. Why do I still feel unfinished? Their shadow is not darkness, it's exhaustion. It's the fatigue of carrying too much sky inside a human heart. Many Sagittarians spend years mistaking movement for growth. They change cities, jobs, even lovers, hoping the next horizon will finally silence the restlessness. But the soul cannot be outrun. It waits patiently, knowing that one day, they will realize that the journey they've been taking through the world was always a journey into themselves. The shadow of Sagittarius is not their need to explore. It's their reluctance to be still. Stillness feels like death to a sign built on momentum, yet it is only in stillness that truth reveals itself. In the spiritual language of archetypes, Sagittarius represents the philosopher, the visionary, and the preacher. The one who seeks wisdom not from theory but from experience. But in the shadow these gifts distort. The philosopher becomes a wanderer lost in endless questioning. The visionary becomes a dreamer detached from reality. The preacher becomes a voice searching for an audience instead of alignment. The shadow emerges when purpose turns into performance, when the message of freedom becomes the mask that hides fear. I once met a Sagittarius man who had lived what others might call a charmed life, world traveler, teacher, author, lover of many souls. Yet, when I asked him if he was happy, he hesitated. I think so, he said, but only when I'm on the move. That answer haunted him. He had mastered motion but forgotten rest. And when he finally stood still, when his body and mind could no longer run, he said it felt like falling into an endless night. But in that darkness he began to pray, not for escape but for understanding. That was the beginning of his true awakening. The Sagittarius shadow teaches that light without grounding burns too fast. The same fire that ignites inspiration can also consume the soul when not rooted in grace. They are seekers of divine truth, but often forget that divinity doesn't always roar in distant mountains. It whispers in ordinary moments. A child's laughter, a sunrise over the same old window, the breath that comes after surrender. And yet, this restlessness is not a curse. It is a sacred engine. It pushes Sagittarius to expand consciousness, to tear down walls of ignorance, to chase God in every corner of existence. But the spiritual challenge lies in integration, to realize that adventure is not out there. It's right here, in the discipline of presence. For every Sagittarius, the soul's true evolution begins when the thrill of discovery turns into the devotion of understanding. Jesus carried this same paradox. He wandered, yes, crossing lands, teaching, healing, but his greatest revelation came not from his travels, but from his surrender. When he paused, prayed, and allowed stillness to guide action. Sagittarius must learn this too. The arrow that hits its mark is not the one shot in haste, but the one released from stillness, from trust. If you are a Sagittarius listening to this, or someone touched by their fire, know this: your restlessness is holy, but it is not your master. It is the compass that points you home, not outward but inward. The places you long to see are reflections of truths you have yet to claim within yourself. You were not made to escape the world, Sagittarius. You were made to illuminate it. But to do that, you must first let your fire become light instead of smoke. The search ends not when you find all the answers, but when you finally rest in faith that the meaning you've been chasing was never lost. It has been breathing inside you all along. Gate 2: The Arrow and the Shadow. The battle between idealism and reality. The symbol of Sagittarius, the archer, tells the whole story of this sign's soul. A human aiming upward, half mortal, half divine, always reaching for something just beyond the visible horizon. Their arrows are made of belief, their bow is forged from fire, and their target is truth itself. But here lies the paradox that defines their shadow. The higher they aim, the greater their disappointment when life doesn't match the ideal they imagined. Sagittarius dreams in constellations, but must live on Earth. And learning to bridge that gap is their most sacred initiation. Idealism is Sagittarius' gift and burden. They see what could be so vividly that what is often feels unbearable. They expect honesty in a world built on masks, purpose in a culture obsessed with distraction, depth in people who prefer comfort to truth. So they love deeply and then feel betrayed when others cannot meet them there. They speak of freedom and then feel trapped by the commitments real love requires. They want to save the world, but quietly resent the world for not wanting to be saved. That inner conflict, the pull between vision and imperfection, is where the Sagittarius shadow hides. It is not darkness born of malice but of heartbreak. It's the pain of seeing too much beauty in a reality that rarely lives up to it. This is why so many Sagittarians oscillate between blazing optimism and silent cynicism. They can go from laughter to silence in the same breath, not because they are moody, but because their hearts are massive and easily wounded. When their ideals collapse, they don't just lose hope, they lose identity. I once spoke with a Sagittarius woman in her 40s who had spent her life chasing visions of higher truth, traveling to temples, studying mysticism, mentoring others. She said, "I thought I was searching for God, but what I was really searching for was a version of the world that could never disappoint me." She smiled through tears. "When that illusion broke, I met the real God. Not the one I wanted, but the one who stays." That's the moment every Sagittarius must face. The death of the perfect world so that the sacred one can be born. When the archer's arrow shatters against reality, they face a choice: to give up and grow bitter, or to grow wise. The mature Sagittarius learns to aim differently, not for unreachable ideals, but for meaningful impact. They stop trying to make life flawless and start making it sacred. Their truth becomes softer, humbler, but infinitely stronger. They no longer need the world to reflect perfection to believe in beauty. They find beauty inside the imperfection itself. This evolution mirrors the journey of Jesus himself, the divine ideal living within a human form. His message was infinite love. Yet he walked through betrayal, misunderstanding, and suffering. He didn't abandon his vision of heaven because earth was imperfect. He brought heaven into imperfection. Sagittarius is called to do the same, to turn ideals into compassion and dreams into action. The arrow of faith must pierce not only the sky but also the heart. In shadow, Sagittarius can become dogmatic, mistaking their perspective for absolute truth. They preach not from love but from fear, trying to convert others instead of connecting with them. This happens when pain hardens into pride. But when humility enters, the shadow dissolves. The archer remembers that their bow is not theirs alone. It is guided by grace. Every missed target was simply divine redirection. Every failure was a lesson in aim. The power of Sagittarius lies in their ability to blend fire and faith, to stand in imperfection and still believe in miracles. When they accept that truth is not static but living, They become the philosophers and teachers who change generations. Their honesty becomes healing. Their laughter becomes wisdom. Their fire becomes light. If you are a Sagittarius who has felt betrayed by your own ideals, know this. Your disillusionment was not punishment. It was purification. It stripped away fantasy so that your faith could finally be real. You are not here to escape the limits of this world, but to show the world that divinity can exist within limits. The arrow that once flew outward now points inward, not to shrink your vision but to align it. When Sagittarius learns to love the real instead of worship the ideal, they unlock their sacred power. The ability to see heaven in human form, to recognize divinity in ordinary life. The dream doesn't die, it descends, and in doing so it transforms everything it touches. Gate 3: The Hidden Fire. Sagittarius, vulnerability, and the power to heal. There is a quiet truth about Sagittarius that few ever recognize. Beneath all that confidence, laughter, and bold vision lies an ancient wound, the wound of being misunderstood. You were born to inspire, to lift others, to live with passion and courage, and yet deep down you've always felt like an outsider looking in. Even among people who love you, you sometimes feel unseen, as if your soul speaks a language that few are fluent in. This ache is the hidden fire within you, the flame that both fuels and frightens you. Sagittarius often carries the pain of not being believed. As a child, you might have been told you were too dramatic, too philosophical, too idealistic. But what others called too much was actually your intuition trying to speak. You've always sensed there's more to life than what meets the eye, but expressing that truth has sometimes left you feeling isolated. So you learn to laugh, to keep things light, to make yourself palatable to those who couldn't handle your depth. That is how many Sagittarius souls hide their vulnerability behind humor, intellect, and independence. But here's the sacred irony. That very vulnerability you hide is your greatest source of power. Because your wisdom doesn't come from theory. It comes from the times you believed and were disappointed, from the dreams that fell apart, from the faith that nearly broke you. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every moment when your fire dimmed has been refining your light. The universe never wanted to destroy your optimism. It wanted to deepen it. For Sagittarius, true healing begins the moment you allow your fire to burn not just upward in glory, but inward in honesty. Jesus carried this same paradox, the teacher of truth who was also the man of sorrows. His power was not that he avoided pain, but that he transformed it. He didn't shield his vulnerability. He sanctified it. And that is your calling too. To take your openness, your rawness, your faith that never fully gives up, and turn it into healing for others. The Sagittarius wound is the healer's initiation. Your ability to lift people is born from the places you once fell. Your compassion comes from knowing how it feels to be broken and still believe. When a Sagittarius finally stops performing strength and starts living truth, something extraordinary happens. The laughter that once protected them becomes medicine. The stories they tell stop being entertainment and start being revelation. People are drawn to you not just because you're inspiring but because you're real. They sense the balance between your light and your shadow. The courage to keep believing without denying the pain that shaped you. That is the alchemy of your soul. You were never meant to be untouchable. You were meant to be transparent so that light can pass through you. The shadow side of Sagittarius often fears emotional dependency. You crave freedom so much that you sometimes equate intimacy with confinement. You run from the very connection your heart longs for because you fear losing yourself in it. But vulnerability is not bondage, it's a bridge. When you allow yourself to be seen, when you admit that even the strongest flame flickers, you create space for others to heal through your example. The archer's true strength is not in how far they can shoot an arrow, but in how open they can keep their heart while doing so. I remember once sitting with a Sagittarius woman who had spent her whole life inspiring others. She was a speaker, a writer, a leader, but when the lights went out she felt empty. "People see my light," she said softly, "but they don't see what it costs to keep it burning." Her tears were not weakness, they were wisdom. In that moment I saw the truth of Sagittarius. You are both flame and fuel. You heal the world not by pretending to never fall, but by showing how faith can rise even from ashes. The hidden fire of Sagittarius is sacred because it never dies. Even when life tests you, when betrayal burns you, when faith wavers, you always rise again. That resilience is not pride. It's grace. It's your soul remembering that divine light cannot be extinguished by human pain. Every time you forgive, every time you choose hope over bitterness, you are fulfilling your celestial purpose. So if you are weary, if you've been hiding your pain behind your smile, let this be your reminder. Vulnerability does not make your fire smaller. It makes it eternal. The cracks in your heart are not flaws. They are the openings through which your healing power flows. Let the fire within you soften, not scorch. Let it illuminate, not isolate. Because when Sagittarius learns to burn with tenderness, the whole world begins to heal. Gate 4, the Temple of Truth. Sagittarius and the return to divine alignment. Every Sagittarius is born with a compass inside their soul, one that does not point north but upward. You have always sensed that your life was meant to aim towards something greater than survival. Beneath your laughter, your questions, and your daring leaps of faith lives a sacred vow. To live in truth no matter the cost. Yet that vow is what the universe tests most fiercely. Because truth for Sagittarius is not an idea to be spoken. It is a fire to be lived. And that fire burns away everything false. For much of your life you may have mistaken knowledge for wisdom. You read, you explore, you collect philosophies like constellations in your mind, hoping one of them will finally give you peace. But true wisdom is not learned, it is remembered. It comes in the moments when you lose what you thought you needed, when you can no longer rely on certainty, and all that's left is faith. The temple of Sagittarius is not built of stone, it is built of surrender. Every experience that humbled you, every truth that broke you, every prayer that went unanswered, they were chiseling your soul into something more radiant. There is a reason the archer's bow curves backward before releasing the arrow. It is the tension of humility that gives flight to purpose. Sagittarius must learn that alignment does not come from constant expansion. It comes from devotion. To live aligned is to live honestly. To say what you mean, to walk your talk, to love without pretense, to seek not attention but authenticity. The temple of truth is not somewhere in the sky. It is your own body when it becomes transparent to the divine. When Jesus stood before the world, he embodied this alignment perfectly. He did not preach from ego but from essence. Every word he spoke carried weight because it was lived, not just taught. He was truth made flesh. And this is what the Sagittarian soul is secretly yearning for, to merge belief and embodiment, to let their ideals become action, to live so sincerely that even their silence teaches. When Sagittarius remembers this, they stop being wanderers and become witnesses. Their life itself becomes the sermon. But alignment comes with purification. Sagittarius must confront the ways they've betrayed their own truth, by saying yes when their spirit said no, by staying in places where the light had already left, by pretending to be smaller to avoid being misunderstood. These moments are not failures, they are checkpoints. Each one invites you back to integrity. For your magic is strongest when your words, your actions, and your soul all aim in the same direction. I once knew a Sagittarius who had spent years teaching spiritual philosophy, while secretly doubting her own path. She confessed, "I talk about faith but I don't live it anymore." That honesty became her liberation. She left her old life behind, not to escape it, but to realign with it. "I realize truth isn't a message," she said later. "It's a lifestyle." That is the heart of Sagittarius. To walk in the world as a vessel of living truth. When you live in divine alignment, the universe begins to respond in kind. Doors open not because you chase them but because you are finally resonating with your purpose. Opportunities appear like echoes of your own integrity. People sense your authenticity and feel safe in your presence. You no longer have to convince anyone of who you are, you simply are. This is the highest vibration of Sagittarius. Effortless radiance born from spiritual coherence. But the temple of truth also requires gentleness. Truth without compassion becomes cruelty. Honesty without love becomes ego. The mature Sagittarius learns that truth is not meant to wound. It's meant to awaken. You are not called to burn others with your fire. You are called to light the way. The goal is not to win arguments, but to inspire remembrance. The ultimate teacher is not the one who knows most, but the one whose presence makes others remember who they are. And so, Sagittarius, your journey leads here, to the sacred stillness where truth no longer needs to be proven, only lived. When you speak now, your words carry the vibration of heaven. When you act, your movement becomes prayer. When you love, your love heals. The restless seeker has become the grounded sage. You are no longer searching for divine truth. You are its expression. This is the great return of Sagittarius. The moment when the fire of wisdom merges with the peace of grace. You become the bridge between sky and soil, between faith and form, between spirit and humanity. The same arrow you once fired into the heavens now points back toward your own heart. And when it lands, you finally understand you were never chasing truth. You were learning to remember it. Conclusion: the great homecoming. When Sagittarius becomes the light they once sought. And now, Sagittarius, your journey comes full circle. The fire that once made you restless has become the light that steadies you. The questions that once haunted you have turned into quiet prayers. You began as the seeker, arrow aimed at infinity, chasing freedom across deserts of meaning and oceans of uncertainty. But what you were seeking was never somewhere out there. It was always the sacred flame within, waiting for your return. This is the great homecoming of your spirit. When the road dissolves into revelation, and you finally realize that the destination was never a place, but a presence. For so long you believed faith meant movement, but now you understand that faith is stillness with purpose. You've walked through confusion, through the collapse of ideals, through heartbreaks that stripped away illusion, and in losing what you thought you were, you found who you really are. The archer has put down the bow. The philosopher has stopped asking why. The preacher has stopped speaking and started listening. And in that silence you've discovered the truth that every Sagittarius soul must one day remember. You are not the fire searching for light. You are the light that needed the fire to remember itself. This awakening doesn't make life easier, but it makes it holy. You still feel deeply, still long for meaning, still crave truth, but now your search has softened into service. You no longer need to prove what you believe, you live it. You no longer fear imperfection. You bless it. You no longer seek freedom as escape. You embody it as presence. The teacher, the traveler, the philosopher, the healer. They all merge into one luminous being who walks with faith and humility, shining without trying, guiding without controlling, loving without needing to be understood. This is the highest vibration of Sagittarius in the heart of Jesus, the merging of divine truth and human tenderness. He too carried the fire of mission, the hunger to reveal heaven on earth, and yet his greatest power was not his miracles, it was his mercy. His wisdom didn't come from what he conquered, but from what he surrendered. And that is the sacred template for you, Sagittarius. To surrender not your power but your pride, not your freedom but your fear, not your voice but your need to always know. When you live from that place, everything changes. Life becomes less about reaching and more about radiating. Your laughter becomes healing, your faith becomes contagious, and your vision becomes prophecy. People will be drawn to you not because you shine brighter than others, but because your light feels like home. You will walk into rooms and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. The restless traveler will have become a living temple, steady, radiant, and real. So take a breath. Feel the fire within you soften into warmth. Look back at the path behind you, not with regret but with reverence. Every detour was divine. Every delay was sacred timing. Every heartbreak was holy ground preparing you to love without limits. The journey is not ending. It is transforming. You are not the same soul who began this road. You are wiser, freer, gentler. You have not only found truth, you have become it. And if this message resonates, let it anchor in your heart. Share it, not to spread my words, but to send light into a world still searching. Comment below your declaration of awakening. I am the light I once sought. Subscribe if your soul feels called, so we may keep walking together in wisdom, faith, and fire. Because Sagittarius, when you awaken, the horizon awakens with you. And the whole world remembers that truth was never something to find, it was something to live.